ओम परतत्वे सदा लीनो रामकृष्णसमाज्ञया यो धर्मस्थापनरतो वीरेशं तं नमाम्यहम्. We are studying here, friends, Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga, and now we are proceeding to the 6th chapter. We read 3 chapters on Maya, and I hope we have all become free from Maya, because the last chapter was Maya and freedom. Today we are coming across a wonderful chapter, wonderful. And the base of the treatment appears to have been taken from the Kena Upanishad. Those who are interested, as I said earlier, that Swamiji's lectures on Jnana Yoga were his lectures on various Upanishads. So in that system, it appears to be the main crux of the treatment is from Kena Upanishad. Swamiji has used other Upanishads and then his broad general observations, which are not included in any so-called textbook of Vedanta. Swamiji's or Sri Ramakrishna's all-inclusive Vedanta shines in every topic. But let us go to the beginning. And name of the chapter is The Absolute and Manifestation. What is the Absolute? In Sanskrit we translate it as Nirapeksha Satya. That which does not depend upon anything else. That which does not require anything else to as support to stand up. That is called Absolute. The reality beyond everything, that is called the Absolute. Sarvatita Satya is called Absolute. So, Nirguna Brahma is called Absolute. Parabrahma, Nirguna Brahma is called the Absolute. Now this Absolute, and what we see the world, we see the universe. There is slight difference in the connotation of the two words, world and universe. In Hindi or Sanskrit, Jagat and Vishwa. Universe is Vishwa. It gives an idea of the infinite variety included in it, that is called universe. And world or Jagat is what we normally see. So whatever it may be, we always experience this world. And I have been repeatedly telling you that this world includes ourselves also, both as a fact of inclusion and both as a part of our experience. I experience the world in what way? I see it, I hear it, I imagine it. So I and the world and the link between, these are all parts of my experience. And Vedanta has been a critic of experience always, the analytical treatment of the experience to find out the truth. So that is called manifestation. That means Brahman appears to us as this, that is manifestation. Brahman itself is avyakta. Brahman itself cannot be seen by the open eyes. Brahman itself is beyond everything. But that very Brahman, when we try to see it, because there is nothing else to be seen. Whatever we see, feel, touch, there is nothing other than Brahman. So, what we see, that means we are trying to see, feel, touch Brahman. But what we see is as much as it is manifested, as much as it is available to our senses. That is the only thing we can see. Little more we can grow, and our mind can imagine certain things. So that also can be included in the world universe or in the manifestation. Manifestation means that which is available to our senses or to the mind. So what is the relation between the two? How that has become this is a topic which is difficult to understand who will not follow the Vedantic lines. But it is not at all difficult when we go through Vedantic lines or as treated by Swami Vivekananda. So, and the lecture, we have been reporting the dates always. So those who are interested in the date, we have been dealing with Maya lectures delivered in October 1896, and then we have shifted to November now. The Absolute and Manifestation delivered in London 25th November 1896. Now here, if you have the book, you please see. There is a figure here in the book. I hope everybody sees this. The only place where Swamiji has used a figure. The one question that is most difficult to grasp in understanding, the one question that is most difficult to grasp in understanding the Advaita philosophy, and the one question that will be asked again and again, and that will always remain. That means everybody will have to get answer for his own. The question will remain. It can only be solved by those who have gone beyond. Till then the question, beautiful Swamiji's language in the Vedanta. He says difficult to grasp. The question difficult to grasp. Because our mind works in limitation. And through that limitation we cannot grasp the question at all. So we have to come out intellectually at least out of our limitations to grasp the question. And that is, we are required to do so in understanding the Advaita philosophy. In realizing will become a far cry in understanding Advaita philosophy. And the one question that will be asked again and again. Because everybody will have to get solution for himself. And that will always remain, is how has the infinite, the absolute, become the finite? Swamiji has used the word become 3 times here. But on the next page, he will use the word appear. We will come to that. So, that is the general statement of Advaita Vedanta, that Brahman itself appears as this world. Some people will say Brahman itself has become this world for our vision. Nothing has happened to Brahman, but Brahman has become this world because we see it as this world, we see it as this universe. So Brahman becomes this universe in our experience, can be the complete sentence. Brahman has become this universe in our experience. And how it has become? That is the question. Brahman, if it is beyond all, Swamiji has used another word here for Brahman, infinite. Limitless, infinite, one without a second. And now it has become limited. Infinite cannot have any parts, please. If there are any parts, it is no more infinite. Collection of finites is not infinite. Some people think mathematically we can understand infinite. I will give an example. They say that positive numbers are infinite and the even odd numbers are infinite and the even numbers are infinite. Please, this is not infinite. No. Uncountable is the right word for mathematicians. Positive integers are uncountable. Odd numbers are uncountable. Even numbers are uncountable. They are not infinite. They are made of parts. They are not infinite. They are made of totality of different finite things do not become infinite. Infinite is always one without a second. Swamiji has shown all these things in the real nature of man. Infinite has no parts infinite is one without a second, that is absolute. So, Swamiji has used as synonyms. How has the infinite, the absolute, become the finite in our perception? I will now take up this question, and in order to illustrate it, I will use a figure. That was the figure. And what is that figure? You please see that figure again. A rectangle and three parts are made. In the first part A, the absolute. And the second part B is below, the universe. And the medium through which it has come is C, and that is time, space and causation. We have dealt with it in the real nature of man. We have dealt with it in Maya several times. It is our mind which is made of time, space and causation. We look at the world, we have no capacity other than our mind. Through our mind and through our sense organs, we are looking at the infinite Brahman. But to see the infinite Brahman, the thing which we are using as instrument is primarily our mind and secondarily our sense organs. And our mind is made of, in various ways the mind is described. Mind is made of Nam and Rup. Mind is made of subject-object division. Mind is made of time, space and causation. So, we are looking at the Brahman. We see the universe because we are looking at Brahman through time, space and causation. For that, Swamiji has drawn this picture. Here is the absolute. Here means in the picture. Here is the absolute, A. And this is the universe B, this below. This is the universe B. The absolute has become the universe. By this is not only meant the material world. Now, I told you the difference between the world and the universe. So Swamiji is explaining the universe. By this is not only meant the material world, but the mental world, the spiritual world, heavens and earths, and in fact everything that exists to our perception. All the Bhuvanatraya, all the 14 lokas or Patal lokas or everything that we can see, feel, imagine, all that is included in the universe. And the Brahman, we imagine Brahman in this way, we see Brahman in this way. So, and in fact everything that exists, mind is the name of a change. Mind is not a substance at all. Swamiji does not say that mind goes on changing. Mind is the name of a change. In our life, there is something changing. And that change, one type of change is called mind. We have to be subtler in our thinking to catch this. Mind is the name of a change. And body the name of another change. Body changes are very obvious, but equally obvious should be the mental changes. You have to perceive the mind first. So the mind is the name of a series of change, you may say. Mind is the name of a change, body is the name of another change. And so on. That means the spiritual world, the world of Bhavarajya. Spiritual world means experiencing God in various ways, what we call the Bhavarajya. That is called by Swamiji, the spiritual world. So, and so on means that world also changes. And all the changes compose our universe. So different levels of changes compose our universe. Swamiji has used the word universe here. So that manifestation is nothing but universe. This absolute A has become the universe third time. B, by coming through time, space and causation, C. This is the central idea of Advaita. Central idea of Advaita is that we see the universe, but the variety is wrong knowledge. We see the universe because we see it through the limited instruments of mind and senses. Actually, it is one only. Actually, it is one which appearing as many. It is one, absolute. And when we try to perceive, see, feel, touch, imagine that one, we see it as many. This, if it is grasped, then we have grasped the Advaita philosophy. Time, space and causation are like the glass, through which the glass here means the lens, the lens, through which the Absolute is seen. We are seeing now, I am seeing now, not only by my eyes, but with the specs. So whatever image the speck makes, that I am seeing. So like that, between us and the Brahman, there is the screen, glass, Swamiji says, of time, space and causation. The glass through which Absolute is seen, and when it is seen on the lower side means through that what we can see, that is called the lower side, in the figure. It appears as the universe. So now the word appearance comes. So we modify the word become by adding, as I said, the Brahman has become the universe in our perception. That means it appears to us like that. It appears as the universe. Now we at once gather from this fact. So from this fact, which is stated by Swamiji, stated by Vedanta, that is a fact. Now we at once gather from this fact and in the Absolute, there is neither time, space nor causation. When we look at the Absolute through time, space and causation, we see the universe. Therefore in the Absolute there is no time, space and causation. Swami will explain that. The idea of time cannot be there, seeing that there is no mind, no thought. Because time exists in the mind. When the mind is not there, there is no time. The idea of mind is nothing but different thoughts. So Swamiji says, no mind, no thought, so no time. The idea of space cannot be there, seeing that there is no external change. Externally, when we see change, we feel the space. There is no external change. Actually, you can, these two sentences can be construed in the opposite way also. There is no time because there is no change. And there is no space because there is no mind. What you call motion and causation cannot exist where there is only one. Only one without a second. Not that one in a vacuum and the one travels. Not that type of one. One means only one, with a capital O. That means there is nothing other than that. No space, no time other than that. So how can there be motion? Now if there is no change, no motion, what is causation? Causation is something become the cause, precedes, then something succeeds it, then we call it the effect. But if there are no changes, no motion, then where is cause and where is effect? It will always be the same reality. We have to understand this and impress it in our minds. That means it should be a permanent feature of our thinking. Impress on our minds. That what we call causation begins after, if you may be permitted to say so, the degeneration of the Absolute into the phenomenal and not before. that our will. So, Swamiji has used a third word, degeneration. Because the absolute is absolute. The absolute is Satchidanandam. Absolute is one without a second. It is perfect. The perfection also is only in the infinite. And our lives are a degeneration. We find imperfection in our life. We do not find perfection anywhere in the universe. And the Brahman is universe, Brahman has become degenerated. Brahman appears to have become degenerated. And Swamiji says, the causation comes only in this degenerated Brahman. Causation comes only in this universe. In Brahman there is no causation because there is no change. So this language is little special. So Swamiji says, if we may be permitted to say so. That means a new language. You know, after Swamiji's Jnana Yoga lectures, Swamiji said it has been an achievement in English language to express these thoughts. The degeneration of the absolute into the phenomenal. Another word used is phenomenal, physical, metaphysical world. That means manifold. Nominal means one, phenomenal means that which we see, feel, touch, manifold. And not before. That our will, our desire, and all these things always come after that. Will comes only when there is something to be willed. Will comes only when there is a need of something, and that is after degeneration. And desires. Desires come only when there is a subject-object split. Then the subject desires the objects. I think Schopenhauer's philosophy makes a mistake in its interpretation of Vedanta, for it seeks to make the will everything. Schopenhauer, German philosopher, he understood Vedanta to a great extent, but with some mistake or limitation. And Schopenhauer said that Upanishads have been my support of my life, and they will be the support of my death. So he was intoxicated by the philosophy of Upanishads. But because it was a Western mind, you may say, so he struck at this point of will. Here I may tell you something aside. These days, some philosopher wrote a book, and in that he claimed that Swamiji's lectures on practical Vedanta, which he already did, were given after Swami Vivekananda met Carl Deussen. And Deussen had learnt everything from Schopenhauer. So Swamiji's Vedanta, practical Vedanta, has come from Schopenhauer. For that he has written a book. Some friend of mine has already shown the criticism of that book. But when Swamiji finds that Schopenhauer's understanding is limited, faulty, how he can follow him? Simple logic. Swamiji's practical Vedanta was born the day Sri Ramakrishna told him that the Vaishnavas, though it is aside topic, but because I should complete the picture. Sri Ramakrishna was dealing with Vaishnavism one day, and he said Vaishnavas promote three things. That you should have taste in God's name, you should honor Vaishnavas, and you should have pity for the other beings. And when he tried to explain, his mind went into samadhi. And coming back, he said, what pity you can have? You are yourself a small mortal. How can you have pity? Not pity. Not pity means pity or daya has a high quality necessary in spiritual life. Daya Bhuteshu has been described in various scriptures. That is the softness of the heart. But in Daya always it that the person is below me. Physically, financially, intellectually, in some ways is below me. So the ego comes. And so Sri Ramakrishna says, you are an insect. How you can show Daya? Not Daya, but Shiv Gyane Jiv Seva. You are serving him, but have the knowledge that there is Shiva. He is Shiva. He is a form of Shiva. And that day Swamiji said, this is practical Vedanta. So, practical Vedanta origination is from Sri Ramakrishna long before Swamiji went to Europe and all that. Wow, how flimsy is the ground that Swamiji's lectures on practical Vedanta happened to be after he met Deussen, who was Schopenhauer's disciple. So Swamiji has learnt his practical Vedanta from Schopenhauer. This is what the PhDs do. Does it have any meaning? And Swamiji's practical Vedanta came as lecture only because people questioned him what is the practical supposition of Vedanta philosophy. That we already seen. Enough for that now. Because Swamiji has mentioned Schopenhauer here and shown the limitations, so I have to speak this. I think Schopenhauer's philosophy makes a mistake in its interpretation of Vedanta. Schopenhauer can only interpret Vedanta. He is not experiencing the truth of Vedanta. For it seeks to make the will everything. Schopenhauer makes the will stand in the place of the Absolute, because that is the original cause. Then in the various Upanishads there is a statement, there are statements, Sa Aichhata, Tad Aichhata, and this Aichhata is translated as will. But there is Sa behind it, there is it behind it. And Aichhata actually does not mean will. Aichhata means he saw. Aichhata means he is conscious being. And so conscious being has this. So, anyway, Schopenhauer makes the will stand in the place of Absolute, but the Absolute cannot be presented as will, for will is something changeable and phenomenal. We see will goes on changing. Phenomenal means it is a part of the expressed world, universe. And over the line drawn above, time, space and causation in the figure, there is no change, no motion. It is only below the line that external motion and internal motion called thought begin. External motion physical, thought means internal motion. They begin after the Brahman is seen through time, space and causation. There can be no will on the other side, that means in the Absolute side. And will therefore cannot be the cause of this universe. Coming nearer, we see in our own bodies, he is showing the position of the will. Coming nearer means to our perception. We see in our own bodies that will is not the cause of every movement. I move this chair, my will is the cause of this movement. And this will becomes manifested as muscular motion at the other end. Will, muscular motion, moving the chair. But the same power that moves the chair is moving the heart, the lungs, and so on, but not through will. I will that I should move my heart. I will that I should move my lungs. They are going on. Given that the power is the same, that means same power moves the chair, same power moves the lungs. It only becomes will when it rises to the plane of consciousness. This consciousness is not Brahman consciousness. our waking superficial consciousness. When it comes to the superficial consciousness, then only it becomes a will. It only becomes will when it rises to the plane of consciousness, and to call it will before it has risen to this plane is a misnomer. That means deep down there is some I consciousness. So the breathing is going on, so the heart is going on, but it does not become will because it is not in our superficial consciousness. This makes a good deal of confusion in Schopenhauer's philosophy. So when the base is wrong, the details of the philosophy will have to create confusion. That much about Schopenhauer. Now, we go back to our absolute manifestation. A stone falls and we ask why. Is that not a universal way? That is due to the defect of our mind. This question is possible only on the supposition that nothing happens without a cause. This has become so much ingrained in us because we are working through the mind. I request you to make this very clear in your minds. For whenever we ask why anything happens, we are taking for granted that everything that happens must have a why. That is to say, it must have been preceded by something else which acted as the cause. This precedence and succession are what we call the law of causation. Something before, something after the laws of causation. It means that everything in the universe is by turn a cause and an effect. That means that will cause, once something is changed, that will cause some other change. So it is a cause and effect, then it is a cause and another effect. It is the cause of certain things which came after it, and is itself the effect of something else which has preceded it. This is called the law of causation and is a necessary condition of all our thinking. Law of causation is the necessary condition of all our thinking. Our mind is made of time, space and causation. We believe that every particle in the universe, whatever it be, is in relation to every other particle. See, how many things are assumed when you ask the question why. Why means it is acted upon by something. That means it is in relation to some other particle. And that is in relation to some other particle. So it is in relation to every particle of this world. There has been much discussion as to how this idea arose. Let us find out how man asks why. How the idea arose that everything in this world has a causation. In Europe, there have been intuitive philosophers who believed that it was constitutional in humanity. It is in the mind of man. No other explanation. Others have believed it came from experience. A lot of things are there in this logic. We see fire with smoke, and we conclude that fire is always with smoke. How many times you have seen the fire and smoke together? So they have tried and tried their best to find that how many times a thing is experienced to make a law in the mind, and they cannot find it out. It differs from person to person. The so-called quick thinkers, if they see something once, they conclude it is like that always. Some people say, let us have some other experience. So, whether it was original man's mind or it has come from experience, but the question has never been settled. It can never be settled. We shall see later on what the Vedanta has to say about it. Vedanta will tell us that you use your mind only. But first we have to understand this, that the very asking of the question why presupposes that everything around us has been preceded by certain things and will be succeeded by certain other things. One point. The other belief involved in this question is that nothing in the universe is independent, that everything is acted upon by something outside itself. Interdependence is the law of the whole universe as pursued by our mind. In asking what causes the absolute, what an error we are making. To ask this question, we have to suppose that the absolute also is bound by something, that it is dependent on something. And in making this supposition, we drag the absolute down to the level of the universe. Very clear? For in the absolute, there is neither time, space, nor causation. It is all one. That which exists by itself alone cannot have any cause. That which exists by itself alone, one without a second, that cannot have any cause. There is no precedence, there is no succession, there is no cause. And yet we ask the question always. A similar question is asked. In one school I went, and a boy of the 6th standard, they thought they are asking very smart question. And we will trap the lecturer by that. The boy said, if God makes this world, who made God? And they all started smiling. I said, first of all, do you understand what is God? We define God as the existence which existed when nothing else existed. This world did not exist. To make the world means it was not there and it was made. There was no time when God was not there. So what is the question of making? And there is the other way to prove it. That's how you will do now. Suppose we find that somebody made God. Then we will call that person God, not this God. And it will go into infinite regress, because who made that person? Who made that person? So the logic itself proves to be illogical when we come into an infinite regress. That will Swami will show now. That which exists by itself alone cannot have any cause. That which is free cannot have any cause. Else it would not be free but bound. That which has relativity cannot be free. Relativity means in relation to this it exists, in relation to that it moves, then it cannot be free. Thus we see the very question, why the infinite becomes the finite is an impossible one, for it is self-contradictory, because the absolute has no precedence and succedence. So to ask why there is self-contradictory. Coming from subtleties to the logic of our commonplace, the second type of logic. To common sense, from subtleties to the logic of our common plane, to common sense, we can see this from another side. When we seek to know how the absolute has become the relative, supposing we knew the answer, would the absolute remain the absolute? It would have become relative. What is meant by no? This is the second side. Now Swamiji is coming to Kenopanishad now. This is a new thought now. What is meant by knowledge in our common sense idea? We have to understand this very clearly. It is only something that has become limited by our mind. We know everything by our mind only. So knowledge means something which has become limited by our mind. We must understand this. It is only something that has become limited by our mind that we know. And when it is beyond our mind, it is not knowledge. Beyond our mind, unless we go there, we cannot know it. And we know only through the mind. So that cannot be called knowledge. Now if the absolute becomes limited by the mind, it is no more absolute. We are trying to know something about the absolute by our mind. So if it becomes limited by the mind, it is not absolute at all. It has become finite. Everything limited by the mind becomes finite. Therefore, to know the absolute is again a contradiction in terms. Two different contradictions we have shown. To ask why to the absolute is a contradiction. To know absolute is a contradiction. Because to know means to go through the mind. And absolute is beyond mind. Therefore, to know the absolute is again a contradiction in terms. Nobody knows God, they will say. That is why this question has never been answered. Because if it were answered, there would be no more be an absolute. A God known is no more God. He has become finite like one of us. He cannot be known. He is always the unknowable one. Now Swamiji brings the Kenopanishad here. But what Advaita says is that God is more than knowable. Now very subtle logic, we have to understand this carefully. God is not known by our mind, but God is more than knowable. This is a great fact to learn. You must not go home with the idea that God is unknowable in the sense in which the agnostics put it, that we can never know it. For instance, here is a chair. It is known to us. But what is beyond ether or whether people exist there or not is possibly unknown. But God is neither known nor unknowable in this sense, that we have not yet known, not in that sense. He is something still higher than known. This you have to understand. Huh? That is what is meant by God being unknown and unknowable. The expression is not used in the same sense in which it may be said that some questions are unknown and unknowable. God is more than known. This chair is known, but God is intensely more than that because in and through Him we have to know this chair itself. Know does not require only the mind. Know requires consciousness. We cannot know anything only with the help of the mind. Mind will give a shape to that. But know depends upon our consciousness. And consciousness is God. So unless there is consciousness in us, not that superficial consciousness, Satchidananda Chit, this you have to understand, that God becomes known. Something has happened to me. I got to understand what has happened. Oh. 1 minute, please. Anyway. 15 minutes more. The storage space in this is over. Okay, we shall proceed. We will make it afterwards. You understood that point? No, mind cannot know anything. Our today's knowledge is through the mind, that we understand. But consciousness is required to know a thing. I see this wall, but I know that I see this wall. That is not my mind. If I close my eyes, I do not see the wall, but I know that I do not see the wall. When I use my mind, I think and I know that I am thinking. But if I do not use my mind, I am not thinking. I know that I am not thinking. So knowledge is something we must understand belongs to consciousness. And then utilize mind and indriyas and other things it may use. But it originally depends upon consciousness. And this consciousness we call God. I consciousness, you consciousness is only a reflection. So to know the chair, I must invoke, you may say, God, and through that consciousness, I use the mind and see the chair. This is the Kenopanishad thinking. God is more than known. This chair is known, but God is intensely more than that, because in and through Him we have to know this chair itself. He is the witness. Witness means unchanging knowing. The eternal witness of all knowledge. I know, but God knows that I know. He is the witness of my knowledge also. Whatever we know, we have to know in and through Him. He is the essence of our own self. He is the essence of this ego, this I, and we cannot know anything excepting in and through that I. Therefore, you have to know everything in and through the Brahman. Here, the word Brahman has come. Absolute is Brahman. To know the chair, you have to know it in and through God. Thus, God is infinitely nearer to us than the chair, but yet is infinitely higher. Higher means unless all these ideas drop, we cannot realize it. Neither known nor unknown, but something infinitely higher than either. He is yourself. Who would live a second, who would breathe a second in this universe if that blessed one were not feeling it? This is from Taittiriya Upanishad. Because in and through him we breathe, in and through him we exist. Not that he is standing somewhere and making my blood circulate. Extra cosmic God does not mean. What is meant that is that he is the essence of all this, the soul of my soul. You cannot by any possibility say you know him. It would be degrading him. You cannot get out of yourself, so you cannot know him. Knowledge, another way to put it, knowledge is objectification. We know something when it becomes an object. When I remain the subject and that becomes the object, then we say that we know it. For instance, in memory, you are objectifying many things. In memory, we are bringing some thought, that means we are objectifying it. For instance, in memory, you are objectifying many things, projecting them out of yourself. All memory, all the things which I have seen and which I know are in my mind. The pictures, the impressions of all these things are in my mind. And when I would try to think of them, to know them, the first act of knowledge would be to project them outside, make them object, and I know them. This cannot be done with God, because He is the essence of our souls. We cannot project Him outside ourselves. Here is one of the profoundest passages in Vedanta. He, that is the essence of your soul. He is the truth. He is the self. Thou art that, O Shvetaketu. Again we are going to Chandogya Upanishad. This is what is meant by thou art God, Tattvamasi. You cannot describe him by any other language. All attempts of language calling him father or brother or our dearest friend are attempts to objectify God, which cannot be done. This can be the way to go, but in the ultimate it is not true. He is the eternal subject of everything. I am the subject of this chair. I see the chair. So God is the eternal subject of my soul. Subject here does not mean the subject to study. Subject-object relation. The knower. I know this. God knows me. God knows I know this. So the infinite alone knows the finite. The finite does not know the infinite. I am the subject of this chair. I see the chair. So God is the eternal subject of my soul. How can you objectify him? The essence of your souls, the reality of everything. Thus I would request to you once more, God is neither knowable nor unknowable, but something infinitely higher than either. He is one with us, and that which is one with us is neither knowable nor unknowable. It is not knowable because it is not an object. It is not unknowable because we are that as our own self. You cannot know your own self. You cannot move it out and make it an object to look at it because you are that and cannot separate yourself from it. Neither is it unknowable. For what is better known than yourself? It is really the center of our knowledge. In exactly the same sense, God is neither unknowable nor known, but infinitely higher than both, for He is our real self. First, we say that the question, what caused the absolute, is a contradiction in terms. And secondly, we find that the idea of God in the Advaita is this oneness, and therefore we cannot objectify Him. For we are always living and moving in Him, whether we know it or not. Whatever we do is always through Him. We stop here. Another topic Swamiji will take. Now the question is, what are time, space and causation? That also Advaita has to explain, and that we'll take in the next term. Om Paratatve Sada Lino Ramakrishna Samakyaya Yo Dharma Sthapana Rato. Oh, I shifted to other shloka. Okay, correct. Yo Dharma Sthapana Rato Veere Shamtam Namamyam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.